Yep.
So I think the kind of notion that there's a cyclic way one might relate to reality, some phases of which might have a different relationship to emotions, to content, to one's body, to experience,
Yep.
right? That I think is useful as a paradigm for understanding stuff about the Dark Knight, right? Which we were just talking
100%.
about.
100%.
And I think a lot of the ideas translate extremely well between the two. And I would actually not be surprised if there was some physiological or hormonal or some kind of overlap in some way, because there's some distinct parallels in terms of the phenomenology and what people report.
Yeah, I think that actually what people describe often as the middle age crisis, funnily enough, is a lot of what's going on at that time is really coincides and sort of is parallel, like you said, with some of the symptoms of the Dark Knight. So anyway, hi Daniel, welcome back.
Great to be here. Yeah, thank
Yeah,
you.
we started to chat, and actually we were just saying that we should have just recorded even this stuff that we were talking about, even though it was only a few minutes. Because I was telling Daniel, first of all, that I feel very fragile today, sort of emotionally and physically, due to my hormones. And so I just wanted to give him a heads up in case I, get really emotional out of the blue and, have him, I didn't want him to be like super kind of startled by the situation. So we just realized that it's kind of funny that it sounded sort of random and not related to what we are going to talk about today, and yet there are actual parallels, funnily enough, because what we're going to talk about today is actually Dark Night of the Soul. I requested that in the comments under our previous conversation that you guys, if you have any questions, to email them to me. And there were many questions, many different questions, but there was definitely a repetitive theme, which was the theme of the Dark Knight, which I'm really glad that we're going to talk about it, because I really think this is not talked about anywhere near enough. And I'm going to just say something very quickly straight away, that this is really in no way meant to scare anybody or to even I don't know that if you agree, but I don't think it is good or even healthy to downplay that part of the awakening journey either. So so let's talk about it. So the first question, Daniel, so there's like a main question sort of, and then there are other questions. So I will try to kind of combine all of them because they all speak to the Dark Knight. But before we said, do you want to say something about that correlation between Dark Knight and the hormones, and also the sort of what we normally refer to as the middle-age crisis and stuff like that?
Yeah, absolutely. And thank you for all of that background and setup. So I routinely use analogies related to hormonal cycles and things like that when talking about Dark Knight stuff. And the reason is it's already part of our culture. We kind of have some appreciation of it. And we also have, like you said, you don't want to neither minimize it nor exaggerate it. You wouldn't want to lean on it as a crutch or an excuse necessarily, but it can be explanatory of what one is feeling and going through, and trying to figure out with talking about the Dark Knight, as you mentioned, how to both say you shouldn't be terrified of the Dark Knight necessarily. And, I have people who are like, literally, I will never do insight practices because I'm terrified of entering the Dark Knight and afraid it will ruin my life. Right. And on the other hand, you have people who, totally dismiss it, and meditation can't cause anything bad. You just get more peaceful and calm and loving and wise and able to relate to your emotions and, heart, body, mind experience and all of that. It's all fine. All these Dark Knight people are totally exaggerating. Right. And then the truth lies somewhere in the middle. Generally, there are these sort of long tails. And the long tails of the truth are there are people who go through meditation. They have almost no dark nighty anything. They're fine. They do actually just get more peaceful and loving and wise. And I know those people. I've met some of them. They exist. That's their path. That's their karma. Fantastic. Good on them. Excellent. I'm glad it happens at least sometimes, right?
Good for you.
Right, right, exactly. Yay. And then there are people who it wrecks their friggin' life, right? And a lot of those people come and talk to me because I'm one of the authors who talks about this, along with people like Dr. Willoughby Britton and David Treleaven and Bruno Caillon and other people who are out there and talk about, what can go wrong. And even Jack Kornfield in his book, talks about dark night stuff. And then he'll say, oh, no, it's just for Theravada and insight practitioners. But lots of other people go through this in lots of other paths. We know that. So, and he knows that too. It's anyway, but that's okay. So, and there are people like, to be serious for a moment, I've had friends kill themselves where this is a substantial contributing factor, very straightforwardly. Not that it was necessarily the only thing going on with them. Most of them had pretty complicated life situations, histories. But I also know people who were super sane, super competent, had nothing, seemed like highly self-actualized people who, when they got to this territory, it was a train wreck, sometimes for years, derailing relationships, careers, finances, health, ending up in psych wards, ending up on meds, and you say, oh, no, it just happened to be that they're bipolar hit on day 7 of their insight meditation retreat. Okay, it's quite a coincidence that I just happen to have talked to hundreds of those people, right? Why is it always day like 6 to 8? It just, that's, so, and then the other question is how much of this is some underlying sort of classical mental illness process that may have nothing to do with insight cycles, and how much of it is purely because they deconstructed the nature of reality and their brain shifted to some sort of, phase of practice where you get to see your shadow and where you're challenged in this kind of hero's journey, go into the underworld kind of a way, right? And so those are ongoing debates, and I respect the fact that that is an ongoing conversation. I don't claim to have perfect answers for that, just so we're clear. But raising the topic in this context, right, at least we do have some of these cultural things where we understand that, like, I've never had these hormone cycles myself that I know of. Apparently males kind of have them, but they may not be aware of them. I don't know. Anyway, but like, I've been in relationships with women for most of my adult life, and you get to see that sometimes there can be these moments with a periodicity to them where the relationship to feelings, to issues, to experience can be very, very different, and sometimes kind of challenging, but also sometimes really honest, because there can be an honesty in these things when the filters kind of come off and the ability to compensate like kind of is altered. And then there can be a real, like, gritty, real something that can come through, even if maybe later they themselves will be like, well, that was kind of exaggerated by something, but there was truth in it. And that sort of in vino veritas, or vino veritas, depending on how you want to pronounce your Latin kind of way, where there's a rawness. And I myself have really appreciated it as sort of a kind of pretty emotionally regulated professional male, right? I have appreciated those moments in my practice where, okay, here comes the filters coming off, and here comes the raw, and here comes the deeper dive into the shadow, and here comes the grit coming through. And I think there's real value in that. So I've been talking for a while. Anyway, that's kind of my setup. What are your thoughts?
Oh God! I mean, I'm just aware that we only have an hour, but that we can always, if we still have things to say afterwards, then we'll continue tomorrow on the subject. Just remember that I'm seeing you tomorrow as well. Yeah, I mean, there's so much to it. I mean, the first thing I thought was, how convenient this is to have rage and then blame it on hormones. You know what I mean? Which actually, I mean, it's a brilliant excuse. But I mean, very often nothing needs to be even said. It's just the vibe that comes across, which like literally is just speaks volumes in and of itself, So I mean, all of it is just really fascinating, and I agree. I think as the more examples there are that are instantly sort of relatable, and in particular with the Dark Knight, where so much of what is going on, we start looking for reasons as to why this is happening, and we can't find the reason. And I think that that's another thing. Is like, you know, believe it or not, I actually only learned about like the cycle, since we are on, you know, staying with the hormone and cycle and all of that comparison. It took me actually a while to learn about my cycle and to realize, oh my God, this is truly predictable. Like I can, you know, I can see I'm so loving and kind on some days. It's like literally I'm like the nicest person on the planet, the most compassionate. And then I turn into this like devil, like bugger off, do not come close to me or I'll kill kind of person. And it just makes no sense. It's completely like on the surface, it looks completely irrational. It would have been so easy to go, what the hell is going on? And other people thinking there's something wrong with you as well, taking it personally, for example. Whereas, like, you know, learning about this and seeing this also had an impact on my relationship, because now, for example, my partner is so aware that he's like, he knows. Oh, I don't even have to tell him, hey, you know, I'm pissed right now, and please, like, you know, just leave me alone for your own sake, you know? But I don't even have to say it. He'll know. And even if I do cross the line, let's say, or I'm not very pleasant when I respond to the simplest question of like, what are we going to eat or something like that today, he won't take it personally. And to me, that's crucial. That is not to say, I think the dark night and the behaviors that happen, absolutely, they don't just impact us, they also impact the people around us. Let us not forget. And so the more there is awareness, just like with my cycle, the awareness of what happens during the dark night to us, and then we can, first of all, recognize that this is dark night, that these are the symptoms, and therefore we can actually quite literally communicate this to the people around us, even if they're strangers, even if you like, I sometimes call customer service and I say, look, I have a really bad day today. I'm really struggling. So if I come across as abrupt or impolite or something like that, please know that this has nothing to do with you or whatever. Please don't take it personally. And then I go on to like share my issues. So what's your thoughts? What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, great. All good and important insights and thoughts. Thank you. Uh, uh, that the sort of the question of out of the blue and for no reason is one of the interesting ones. Like one of the things that people, including myself and countless hundreds and thousands, I guess thousands at this point, of people I've talked with and read forum posts, they do describe that phenomena of there seems to be no reason why they are suddenly so angry, so afraid, so sad, so disgusted, so fed up, so claustrophobic, so irritable, so volatile, right? And so this brings up this kind of dual nature of these things showing up and just finding reasons to justify themselves or arising even if they can't find any normal sense of reason to justify themselves. And then the other side of like, sometimes there is real wisdom in these things, right? Sometimes like, yeah, your job does suck and the world is a crap show of horrible, stupid, greedy idiots crashing around, wrecking our gorgeous planet. And the people on the news are awful and the justice system is breaking and the capitalists are raping the planet or whatever. And like, you've got, and exploiting the workers. And like, there is rage and disgust to be had, right? If you're cubicle dwelling minimum wage, life that we've created for ourselves. So it's not like there aren't valid complaints, right? Or someone in a relationship wasn't kind enough, wasn't generous enough, wasn't understanding enough, right? Wasn't whatever enough, right? I get that. And so, and trying to figure out how to capitalize in some skillful way, not to use the word capitalize in context would be bashing on capitalism. It's a little linguistically interesting, but how to take advantage of the fact of these opportunities to see the problems, right? Which may be distorted and amplified and out of balance in some sort of hormonally dysregulated kind of way in dark nighty phases, right? There may be. And a lot of people look back on what they did in those phases with some kind of regret and go, oops, That's really common. I can't tell you how many times I've done that. People I know have had some sense of regret later. And on the other hand, it can be like a catalyst that can break things that kind of needed to be broken, or can dislodge old stuck patterns that were just not working well. And so that's the other funny paradox, or just show you the problems inherent in dualistic perception and the opportunity to find a better way to perceive reality, right? Because it can deeply amplify this problem that is created as as our brains take this changing pattern of sensations and sort of try to construct a stable identity, an observer, knower, controller, beer, doer somewhere, usually behind our eyes or in our chests or somewhere. And so it's this very funny thing where the opportunities for deep insights, both psychological and also archetypal, and about the world and about the problems inherent in dualistic illusions and greed, hatred, and delusion in the classic like Buddhist meditative sense is there. And yet it can also be sort of so volatile and surprising and confusing and disruptive that I honestly wonder if females who haven't had like kind of monthly sort of training, like once a month training to figure out how to navigate in society in the face of what can sometimes be a shifted frame, a shifted relationship to emotions and issues and stuff and people and everything. I wonder if that training isn't useful, because I think a lot of those skills just translate really well. And I often haven't speculated, do women have an advantage because they've had that training in a way that men may not have in sort of quite such an obvious way? What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, I'm just thinking because as I'm listening to you, there's like, I'm seeing at least sort of five things in what you're saying, and I'm sort of all over the place as to which one to pick up on and talk about. There's something that came to mind as you were saying, because there's this what really amazes me in terms of like certain, just like with cycles, we can sort of, they're predictable, right? They're really predictable. Well, as I mentioned in our previous conversation, my journey really has unfolded without frame of reference. And there are plenty of benefits of now in retrospect that I am really glad that I actually didn't have much of knowledge about the process of awakening or stages of awakening and so on. But I also absolutely have massive appreciation of that knowledge. And also I can absolutely see why having no frame of reference, for example, when my dark night first kicked in after the initial awakening, had I met you, had I had a conversation with you, for example, about what was going on at the time.
For people who know this theory, right?
Right? Exactly. Had I been able to share it with you with your knowledge of the subject matter and everything, there's absolutely no doubt in my mind that to just be able to hear from you say, this is what's going on, this is why this is going on, you're okay, here are some tips, right? To just not, because I'm going, I don't know, what amazes me basically is that so much of my suffering. So I was suffering just by virtue of being in the dark night. So there's no escape. There's going to be suffering.
Yeah.
The two most frightening parts of that was two things. One, that I mean, I would say the most frightening part of it was that I couldn't find a thought or a story. I couldn't say, oh, I'm suffering because I have this story playing out, or oh, I'm suffering because I'm just caught up in some thoughts, or it's just a thought, whatever. I couldn't find a freaking story, and I couldn't find a thought that I could associate with it. And it was like a massive existential terror. It was constant feeling like I'm, first of all, falling apart. Like I didn't know who I was anymore at all. It was like living between, I was neither informed nor informed. I was nowhere. I was sort of, and I had these massive kind of waves of terror, that feeling like I was going to be sucked into the void, a few times. And there
Yeah,
were all sorts of
classic.
other, and right? Thank you. And so this is what amazes. So that alone was frightening. The fact that I couldn't find a thought or a story that could be an explanation, which made it even more frightening because I didn't know basically what was going on. So I am absolutely convinced, looking in retrospect, that had I known, like I said, what was going on, and that this was very much awakening in progress, first and foremost, that I'm not saying I would suffer less, but at least I would not have the extra overlay of terror of what is going on, like, do I need a psychiatric help or like whatever, right?
Yeah,
Um,
yeah.
so then I remember when I read your book before our first conversation, and I just remembered how amazed I was that, there weren't just stages of awakening. You actually identified stages of the actual dark night. And
Well, these people
that,
did. So it's in these books, by the
yeah,
way. It's like
yeah,
the like from a long time ago did. It's not my tech, right? I wasn't smart enough to figure this out. I'm just passing this on that smarter people than myself figured out
I
and just
appreciate,
happened to resonate.
yeah, I appreciate that you say that, but it's your book that I first sort of came across, seeing the Dark Knight had stages, right? And I actually reflected back on, what I've been through, and I couldn't believe that my Dark Knight, for the person that had no reference point, no frame of reference, that Dark Knight quite literally played out in that sequence. I could identify literally those bits, So
Yeah,
yeah, so maybe should we talk a little bit about those stages, and maybe what are they, and like a little bit maybe about each?
sure, absolutely. And thank you for that, because it's also validating of my own experience, right? When I first ran into the maps, I'd been crashing around in this for about 10 years and had been on a few retreats. And then when someone described the maps and they were able to describe what I had gone through in order on the retreat, but also what I had gone through in bigger cycles for the last 10 years of my life, I was like, you have got to be kidding me. What? Why? It was one of the most mind-blowing things of my entire life. It was so normalizing, so helpful. Now, I should say that just a few things to back up, that not everybody finds the map theory helpful, sometimes even if they know it. So there is not, even if and sometimes even if they say, yeah, well, that fits, and they still don't find it helpful. So there's so just because you necessarily did doesn't mean somebody else will. I keep being amazed that it's not helpful for people sometimes, but sometimes it just isn't. Like, despite the fact that in theory it should make such a difference, in practice it doesn't quite. And that's a problem I don't really know how to solve, and we kind of need to work on somehow. Um, but for some people, it is that kind of revelation, like, oh my God moment, where they just
Mhm.
are like, it feels so validated, so normalized, so empowered, all the tips and tricks, all the frame. Oh, wow, what a fit. So just in case you're somebody watching this and you read the maps and you're like, yeah, but, or even if you know them, it somehow the application doesn't change your situation or make your life better. There are some people who describe that. It's not that you're necessarily broken, it's that there is also a bell curve and a range of how well people not only identify their experience as fitting the maps, right? There's some people who super do, some people who super don't, and then are kind of ranging between. They're like, oh yeah, kind of parts of it sometimes, sure, I get it, But also, even if they know that, and even if they necessarily say, yes, that was extremely descriptive, that doesn't mean its prescriptions or its predictions or anything will necessarily make their lives better. So there's also a learning curve or a bell curve of some people, even knowing the theory, they're like, yeah, but it didn't help. I was still a wreck, or I just couldn't apply it, or it doesn't seem whatever. And then there are people who, when they apply the remedies and stuff, like, it's like a key fitting a lock. It's like, boom, everything opens and they're good to go. It's super empowering. So just to normalize, like in my own experience of having presenting with those people even before I talk about the maps, if you're one of these people who, you don't think they really fit even after you read them, there are definitely some people who have that experience. To normalize that for people who are not like the two of us, that's fine. And even if you know them, just to normalize it, they don't always necessarily help as much as you think they will, or for some people, right? So just those two things to put it out there to help people in the audience in case you have that reaction, worth validating and normalizing that too, because that is part of the range of what happens out there. Okay, so now specifically to get into the maps as if they are the wonderful things that they are and descriptive, which I think, at least for me, they were. So, okay, so the big first thing is after the big peak experience, what I would call the arising and passing away, a kundalini opening, an energetic stuff, a first energetic boom. Some people could think of it as their first awakening. It's not always a huge dramatic experience for people, but sometimes it really is, and it could involve a ton of stuff. I could go on about it for hours. I literally have on videos before, but it's a big opening of some kind. And then for them, the dark night, the knowledges of suffering, whatever you want to call it, can happen for some people. And the first stage of that is what we call stage 5 in the insight map, after stage 4, the big opening. So stage 5 is dissolution, the feeling of like, wait, where'd the energy go? Where'd the power go? Where'd the focus go? Where did the motivation go? It's like the couch potato stage. Like they had all this clarity and vision and ability to perceive really clearly and insights. And it was like, wow, meditation, psychedelics, whatever, like, it's incredible, and their mind is all super sharp. And then all of a sudden they're like, wait, what I was supposed to meditate. Was I kind of like, wait, I guess I was supposed to get up and do, like the power just drops out. It's like all of a sudden the like stoner couch potato stage, even if you aren't a stoner couch potato, right? You're just kind of sitting there kind of hungry and wanting some Cheetos and, watching funny cat videos and can't really get it together to do anything or whatever. Like I've seen all these variants, and it can be really confusing because moments before you were like spiritually awake and aware and powerful and capable and creative and not sleeping much, and now you're like, God, I just kind of want to like lay here on the couch and like stare at the wall patterns or whatever. So then the next stage after that is classically called fear or terror, right? And also, which of these is going to hit people the strongest is highly variable. Some people get them each in order. Some people might just kind of get one of them really strongly, or they might kind of blend together into something. So it's not like they happen always perfectly in the sequence. But the next one is fear or terror. And this can be anything from kind of a mild sense of like unease or like the things you're kind of worried about in your life coming up to profound paranoia and claustrophobia and freaking out, like terror, like a tiger is chasing you all the time, but they aren't. And you're trying to figure out why your whole system is just like, what the, your heart is racing and you're sweating and you're nervous, and it can project onto people. Like you worry, I've had people like go on retreat and think the food is not going to be enough and they're going to starve to death, and that their teachers are suddenly psychopaths who are going to do terrible things to them or whatever. Not that occasionally teachers don't do bad things, but they haven't yet. And so the fear can project onto anything, anyone, health, body, environment, people, traditions, everything, right? So it can get super weird, and everything in between. So again, there's a bell curve on this. So some people just felt a little anxious and then it moved on, and some people like totally freaking out. Most people are in the middle somewhere, right? Where they have some fear, like, why am I suddenly afraid on the cushion and thinking all these frightened thoughts, right? So it's it's handleable, it's manageable. And then the next one is misery. So misery, it's suddenly like, whereas fear can be very kind of edgy and like misery is like heavy and thick. It's kind of like the sad version of dissolution. It's like, and it can have this body heaviness, that heart heaviness, this thickness, this density, this slow gut punch of, oh God. And it can involve a lot of remorse, guilt, grief, agony, and just, oh man, crying and tears, but like the heavy version of that, the thick, dense version of that. And sometimes it can project out into the world, like we see the misery of the world of human suffering or animal suffering or plant suffering or biosphere suffering. It can have a lot of, so anyway, so there's misery. And, but again, for some people, it's just like, oh, I felt kind of heavy, but like, I'm okay. It's not bad. They don't really know. It's not a big deal. It's okay. And then because I don't want to like, because I'm kind of going to describe these in sort of extreme terms. I do the extreme part well, but like I want to, you know, for plenty of people, this is not that big a deal. It's like, oh, just a moment to discover your sadness or maybe some stuff you have regrets about or whatever. So then the next thing is disgust. And disgust is like, ah, really, that's you know, and it can project onto anything and everything, our relationships, our jobs, our world, the current political system,
Spirituality,
his
even spirituality
spirituality,
overall,
teachers,
and yeah,
screw all that, all these you know, Daniel thinks he knows what he's talking
yeah.
about, fuck that guy, you know, like you know, these people, you know, and I get that, I've been there, I've totally been there, right? So if you're having that reaction to me, maybe it's just me, or maybe you're in the disgust stage, I don't know, like, or both, it could be both, that's fine. Like, and the thing is, often disgust is like there's something to be disgusted about. That's gross.
Mm-hmm.
Like that is, you know, late stage capitalism can be totally awful. And so like, but it can project onto perfectly good things, like a relationship where the person is really nice to you and kind, and it was really healthy. And all of a sudden you entered the stage and you just make a mess of it. And you don't appreciate them. And, you know, okay, you know, some job that you really were making a difference. And if you're in a different frame of mind, to be totally fine. And now it isn't, or, you know, a schooling or career, anything. Your body, like, oh God, I feel like I'm awful today. You know, it's a thing. And so that kind of thing can become, again, there's a range. Some people's like, I'm a little irritated, so what? And some people it's like, this is all totally horrible, and everything in between. But most people are in the middle somewhere. It's, you know, something to work through, but it can bring up real complaints. So, or totally made up stuff. Some people just start making up things that are about totally, you know, that aren't true at all to try to justify their feelings. And that happens too. So the next one is desire for deliverance. And that's the sense of wanting to get out. And the way I see this manifesting in a lot of people is they're trying to find their next retreat. They're trying to get their finances in order. They're trying to get their next vacation. They're trying to find a way. They have like, you know, plane ticket deficiency syndrome, or like they've just feel like they've got to, whatever it is, like they've got to go somewhere, and it could be this, I just need this. There is the better thing. Here is not the good thing. There is the better thing. It might be a retreat, a teacher, a setting, a beach vacation, a different something, a different partner, a different job. They got to get out. They're going to ordain. They're going to renounce the world. They're going to go live in a cave. I don't know, they're going to cash in their 401k and go something somewhere. So you see, there's a lot of possible reactions to this, and again, could be mild to extreme, and most people fall in the middle somewhere. But you see a lot of that kind of behavior. And then you got to find another tradition, another technique. Oh, this insight meditation stuff is garbage. I'm going to go do Dzogchen. Okay, fine, good. Why not? Or something. I don't know. Like, or that goat farm that they always wanted to do. Now they're like selling their condo. And so you see a lot of that. And then the next one is called reobservation, which is kind of stage 10, which is kind of boringly named. It has the least dramatic name of all of them, but is foremost the most dramatic of the stages. And it's the real, it's tight, it's irritating. People can't sit for a few minutes before the restlessness kicks them off the cushion. It's like all of the stuff of the dark night combines with this incredible lack of perspective and contraction into your issues, and the sort of blindness of like narcissistic, self-obsessed, right? And it's very visceral. It's like tactile. It's functional. It's like the full body soul equivalent of like restless leg syndrome or something, or the sense it can be very, very dysphoric. And for otherwise, there's just kind of mild irritation. And it's like, I kind of want to get up off the cushion, but I'm going to sit through it, and they're fine, right? And again, there's this range. And that's also the reobservation. If you're going to really lose it, this is the one, right? That or the real peak experience where people get super manic. But this is the phase, right? The phase where people touch their deep, dark stuff. And sometimes that, right? And if you're going to get in really furiously enraged or psychotically angry or, you know, freaked out or volatile or projective, reobservation is the place that's the most likely to happen. Not that it happens for most people, but it is that's the one, you know.
Is this the stage where, because I came across people who had what seemed like massive awakening, and really, you know, talking about it, even getting a sort of following, and really saying things that I, you know, very much resonate with, made sense and everything, only to then notice those very same people suffer to what to me at least looks like, having read the spiritual emergence as a kind of messianic complex, and
Yeah.
the religion comes into this, and they now are out to save the world, and all sorts of things. And I have to tell you, Daniel, that was it was a shock to me. I couldn't understand how that was even possible, given what the experiences that they had, the shifts or awakenings or whatever you want to call it. So I don't know why that came now, because I'm wondering, or the other thing that I know of is like this real sexual drive that, I mean, gets so out of hand that you think you love someone so much that I think you want to basically have sex with everything moving, including objects. I mean, it really is a real thing. Like, I'm not saying that in any way that's I'm not ridiculing what I'm talking about at all, because it's actually very serious. Um, does that fit in this stage, or this is something completely different?
Okay, so there's two things in there. One is the zealousness, and then the other is the hypersexuality, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so the zealousness of wanting to save the world or becoming messianic or whatever, really generally for most people starts in their peak, when they have the big opening, rising and passing away, big first Kundalini awakening, whatever you want to call it, stage
Mm-hmm.
4. That's when most people get very, very zealous, very inspired. They have seen something profound. They want to share it with others, and mixed it with a touch of extroversion or narcissism or whatever, or just
Mm-hmm.
creativity and enthusiasm and wanting to help people and natural compassion,
Mm-hmm.
of wanting to share the news of something that was really transformative and helpful in a natural way, right? So it doesn't have to all be pathological to want to be
Mm-hmm.
messianic. I'm sure
Mm-hmm.
there are plenty of good messiahs who were very good people who wanted to do something very useful in the world. Obviously,
Yeah.
whole religions have been founded around this. So got it. And so through whatever combination of factors, pathological or altruistic, or skillful, that create the zealousness. That zealousness then in the dark night can take on a very weird quality. And this is where you sort of get the Jim Joneses of the world and the Branch Davidians and the obviously Waco was complicated. I don't want to dissect that all of that, or maybe even the Nexiums, where
Mm-hmm.
where something in the path a lot. So there's a big insight, a big opening, some cool thing that is inspiring and does draw people. It's magnetic. Like people can feel that something has happened to them and they want some of that, right? So that's a thing. And then you mix the dark night into that, which can still have residue of the zealousness and the inspiration and the thing to help and save the world and be the special people and whatever it is. So the culty stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And then you add reobservation to that, and that's where you get like at the very far extreme tail, and the drinking the Kool-Aid and the mass suicides and apocalyptic culty crazy and suicide bombers who had their big conversion experience and then got radicalized to some spiritual movement and then hit reobservation, wanted to shoot up a bunch of people or blow themselves up in a mall or whatever awful thing. So like that cycle is also explained, at least partially, with lots of other social conditioning and stuff and background and attachment theory and tons of other stuff. Like, but that is almost certainly, from my point of view, one factor in that kind of cycle. Okay, so that's the zealous thing. And that can get very weird. We're suddenly like, these people get paranoid and they get strange and they get like, they had their opening. There's clearly some wisdom there, but then they get very odd on YouTube or, in their public media, and you get to see the decompensation. And there've been a bunch of like public figures who it's been very obvious to watch that happen, and it's tragic. Right. And they could be helped by this theory. Maybe some people are, some people aren't. So then the hypersexuality thing. So in the big peak opening is usually the rising and passing away is you going to get hypersexual do. And you see people describing things like, I'm having sex with the whole universe, or I want to have sex with the whole universe, or like they can have a tremendous amount of sensuality. And then what happens to that in the dark night is variable. And you kind of see or at least I see sort of clinically, or clinically is the wrong word because I'm not seeing these people in clinic, but like from an observational point of view, kind of two patterns. Number one is they get very, very sexual in the arising and passing away in their first big energetic Kundalini-ish opening, and they have access to bliss, and suddenly, Tumo makes sense to them and Tantra makes sense to them. And there's this, they can get all of a sudden very polyamorous or whatever, like there's that. And then in the dark night, two things can happen. One is that all kind of goes away and they get the reverse. Like they were hypersexual and now they're like not sexual. They're renunciate, they're disgusted, they're irritated, they don't want to friggin' have sex with their people. They're this disgusting world, this disgusting body. I just have no interest. Like, so that could be very confusing for partners, by the way, if because these cycles can be very disorienting and real, particularly if you have two people who are both on the path, right? And they're going through this at different times. If it's not that it all being synced up is always nice either, because both people being really high together and then both people crashing in the dark night, that both people crashing in the dark night in a synchronized way can sometimes be a total mess. They went on a retreat together. They both had their both hit the dark night in, right? So I've gotten to see some of that in my own adventures and my friends. So anyway, so so that's one pattern where like it kind of goes away. But then the other pattern that you see less commonly but can happen is that that's kind of like the one thing that for them is their drug, their crutch, their outlet, their release, their thing that is not all dark and whatever. But it can sometimes get this sort of different vibe to it, like more desperate or predatory or needy or something, rather than the open, expansive, flowing, energetic thing it may have been before sometimes. So, right, we're like, in the same kind of way in the dark night, some people who were fighting addiction stuff go back to their addictions, or some people who were, because they need some crutch or some brace or some against the jarring thing that is reality. They start drinking again, they go back to benzos, they start smoking a lot of pot, whatever it is, whatever their thing is. Ketamine, I've seen a bunch of recently. So that's the other pattern, where somewhere in the dark night, where instead of walking away from all those things, they kind of like, they need that as their one thing that they're not reacting in a really negative way, even if it might get kind of not always the most skillful, but sometimes it is like, sometimes keeping sex as your, thing that's your crutch through the dark night, if it's in a healthy relationship, might be, a fine crutch, particularly in comparison to substance abuse generally, right? So, anyway, so there's this range of what you actually see out there in the field in terms of how that goes. Okay, that's my full answer. Sorry, that took a while.
No, it's okay. Again, it's one of those topics that we should have like 5 hours, like, to really, to even just touch the tip of the iceberg, to be frank, even with those 5 hours. But I agree. I want to go back a little bit to what you said about, I so appreciate that you, at least twice, even in this conversation, you talk about how MAP is a sort of a reference point, but that it shouldn't be sort of downplayed, it shouldn't be sort of completely ignored, but it neither should be sort of held on to rigidly. And I think it's not just to do with Dark Knight, but like every map, having had none of this knowledge, I had gone through those stages, like those very stages that are laid out, that I then later on came across in your book. So I think it's good for those who believe that there are no stages, to see that there in fact are stages. We can completely dismiss them if we go absolute, and it's fine. I don't actually think this is helpful at all. Sometimes maybe, sometimes it may not be, but that's like a completely another subject, which maybe we'll talk about tomorrow, like this whole drama around there's no stages, there's no path, and other variations on the theme. So maybe we can actually go to some questions now.
All right, cool, let's do.
It's a continuation anyway. So here's a question that doesn't require any time really to answer. Kidding. Is what is the point of the Dark Knight?
Wow, and there's that's a really good question. A question I myself have asked many times when I've been in it. So I get that, right? What the hell is the point of this, right? And there's a lot of kind of emotional ways you could when you could imagine the person typing and like what the actual, if they had said it, would it have sound what is the theoretical point of this, or what the fuck is the point of this, right? Yeah.
I didn't pick up on the tone of the question, but
right, I don't know, but like, but and there's a lot of different ways I can answer that. I can answer that from the like,
the point
right,
of all this? Exactly. Yeah.
So, and that's a good one, and that's a deep one, and obviously that second one I can't fully answer, like that existential, like Sartre, kind of like, point. I can't answer that one. I don't know. Like, what is the fucking point?
But we
For certain.
understand, we understand and we appreciate the tone,
Sure.
and what
But
that,
from another point of view, what is it? So Buddhist framing of it, this is an opportunity to see deeply the deeper levels of suffering inherent in greed, hatred, and delusion, in clinging, in our projections, to begin to get closer to what is meant by dukkha or suffering in the deep fundamental sense of the suffering created by the mind illusorily created a sense of stable something, permanent sensations. And so in that kind of way, that it's an opportunity to understand truth number one, the first noble truth at the deepest level, that then can allow them to see the hot coal they are holding and let go of it, and then awaken, right? So that's the kind of like soteriological Buddhist overlay of straightforward orthodoxy of the Four Noble Truths, the Noble Eightfold Path, leading to this recognition of suffering at the deepest level. And the Dark Night is a very direct, unanesthetized, maybe slightly exaggerated, but then demonstrative way to do that. Okay. And it's not that I don't think all of that is true. I think all of that is actually true. Even as dogmatic and formulaic and problematic as it sounds functionally, but is that the whole story? No, I don't think that is the whole story, nor necessarily the most helpful frame, right? Is this an opportunity for psychological growth? Is this just a tragic shit show that people have to go through from some fucked up quirk of our physiology? And maybe we could genetically engineer people who don't have to go through that, or maybe these people already exist, as demonstrated that not everybody seems to really report anything that dark nighty on their spiritual journey, right? So like, that's another way to look at it. Maybe this is just an unfortunate accident of physiology, pain of childbirth or something, which just sucks, right? I mean, like, what's good about that? I don't know, probably nothing. But so like, is it just some physiological curse that we just aren't evolved and we're a more evolved creature because we're still kind of a work in progress? Then we would progress through this without our brain doing whatever fucked up neurochemistry or hormonal whatever it does. Like, okay, I could see that too as a perfectly other, kind of answer. But for me personally, it's an opportunity for some real honesty about stuff I might be in denial about it. It's in terms of like, as being a male who's conditioned to not really feel a lot of feelings in professional contexts, and to sort of get through to actually have moments of real visceral, like, oh, fuck, I have to feel this because this is what's going on now, right? Is it an interesting opportunity to go on the hero's journey, to plunge into the underworld, to go to have a alchemical crucible of fire transforming you into something else, in that sort of Dante's Inferno like kind of way of walking through the purging flames into whatever, I could see all of that from a kind of an archetypal Jungian shadow side point of view. So that's just kind of my scattergun of various approaches to this, and I've adopted many of those and probably more along the way, and found some of them helpful and sometimes not.
it's a great question. It's a really great
Yeah.
question, and I can't believe that you managed to somehow answer it, even in terms of like precisely this particular question, like what is the point, which kind of connects, I think, really well with the next question, actually, which is, can it be avoided?
Yeah, that's like the literally, I would say, $1 billion question. And if a billionaire gave me $1 billion right now to study one thing, maybe that's the thing I would put it to, right? Because not that the positive stuff isn't super important, because the two questions are kind of hand in hand. How can you get the positive effects without the side effects, right? That's the question in medicine. How can you give antibiotics that don't cause allergic reactions, resistance, and terrible diarrhea that can kill you and stuff, right? How do you do surgeries where nobody gets infected? How do you heal the mind from its greed, hatred, and delusion, trauma, etc., without having to touch some of that with awareness and go through some of that in some sort of cathartic or therapeutic crisis or healing crisis kind of way? This is a super deep, fundamental question at the very heart of spirituality. And I will first of all say, I do not know what I think is anything like the answers hopefully we'll have in 20, 30, 40 years, when hopefully philanthropists do suddenly give us a lot of money and think this is an important question. We get to study it really well and bring hopefully the lens of non-materialist obsessed science to a problem that is usually mired in orthodoxy and people's limited personal experiences with what happened to help them. And so there are definitely traditions that claim to have the perfect solution, that if you do exactly what we say, you will have no dark nights. You will simply progress on a linear or exponential trajectory towards the light and the goodness and the kindness and the wisdom and all of that, and everything is fine. I have run into a bunch of those as that. I've also talked to countless people who have come from those traditions for whom that's not how it worked out. Not that there aren't some people for whom that does seem to be true. So there do seem to be some people who can avoid it. Whether or not you are one of those, I have no idea. We don't know how to predict this ahead of time. So the first thing is, there is clearly a range of people where they describe a very nice, light, fluffy, happy path where they never touched their darkness. They never had a crisis. They never screwed up their life. They never became weirdly emotionally volatile. I know them. I have met them. They exist. Fascinating. However, the other problem with talking to someone like me is I'm kind of like, like being an ER doctor, you think every surgery, gets infected and everybody's back pain becomes an opiate addict and everybody who's driving is texting on their phone while smoking crack or whatever. And because that's what you see in the ER. It's predictable and then that skews your view. And as someone who talks about the Dark Night and helps a lot of people with this, I think probably way more people are going through this than actually are. But do I firmly believe that there is any tradition living today that can, for 100% certain, make sure that nobody goes through this? No. I don't actually believe that currently exists, though plenty of traditions advertise themselves that way. Sorry if you're one of those that I just offended you. Please give me evidence that that is true. And I good evidence, not highly biased evidence like you typically get out of the traditions that claim this. So can you actually avoid this for everybody at all times? I personally don't think so. But again, next time it sounds like we will talk about tips and tricks that make it more likely that you can do better when this arises. And the traditions have a tremendous amount to say about that, right? How to preload goodness and kindness and skillful emotional stuff before you may go into it, and or can you go around it entirely and just be here and wake up?
Yeah,
that I would non-complicated way. So that actually could be quite the long conversation, and I think would be a really interesting one, but we're almost out of time. Yeah, ooh, that's a good teaser. This is like
exactly
quite the teaser. Sorry, we're doing that.
I would love to talk about that. I suppose we're going to continue on the Dark Knight theme tomorrow as well. Yeah, Daniel, thank you.
Thank you. It's been delightful, and look forward to seeing you tomorrow.